The door slammed shut because of the wind, and she barely had time to turn the key before she heard thunder crashing over the street. When she looked out the window, she saw a man sitting on the sidewalk, wet from head to toe, with a military backpack leaning against his body and his gaze lost somewhere far away. There was something in that silence that hurt more than any cry for help. When she opened the door and offered him shelter, he refused. But when she heard, just for one night, he got up slowly and went inside without saying his name. He slept on the couch like a wounded soldier returning from an invisible war. The next morning, he disappeared. But what he left behind, you won't believe it. Stay with me. What happened next changed everything. She stood there for a while, looking at the still crumpled couch, the blanket neatly folded, as if apologizing for existing. The cup of tea she had left on the table remained untouched, and the cushion he had rested his head on still held a faint smell of rain and mildew. It was as if he had passed by without wanting to disturb, without leaving a trace. But he did. Inside her, there was an anguish that she herself could not explain. It was just one night, she told herself. Just a gesture. But why did it hurt so much in my chest? Maybe because, deep down, she knew. No one disappears like that. If they're not used to not being looked for, if this has touched you in some way, if you have experienced something similar, or know someone who lives in the shadows of silence, leave a comment below with what touched you the most. This channel exists to give voice to these stories, to remind us that small gestures can transform lives. And when you like and subscribe, you are helping this message reach further. Because sometimes, all someone needs is to be seen by someone like you. But what she didn't know yet was that that night, seemingly forgotten, was about to return, and with it, a secret buried for years. They spent years living as if that night had been just a detail forgotten in the rush of the world. She woke up early, watered her plants, arranged the cushions on the sofa, the same one he slept on, and continued with a simple life, the kind in which every gesture carries a bit of disguised loneliness. He never talked about what happened. Not with her neighbors, not with her friends, not even with her mother, who used to notice when her eyes would drift away for no apparent reason. It was as if keeping it was a way of preserving what little was left of that night. A respectful, almost sacred silence. But his absence, for some reason, began to weigh more heavily than the memory itself. There were nights when she would make a cup of tea and leave it on the corner table, as if she were waiting for someone to return. Other nights, she would dream of wet footsteps coming through the door, or thunder cracking on the empty sidewalk. And every time the rain beat harder on the roof, her heart would race, not out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that, in some inexplicable way, it had left its mark on someone other than her. She tried to convince herself that it was just a gesture, a shelter, a warm couch in exchange for a cold night. But the questions wouldn't leave her. Who was he? Why did he disappear like that? Did he survive the winter? Did his backpack still accompany him? Did the pain in his eyes ever find relief? And then, just when everything seemed to have sunk into time, came that day that began like any other. She was in the backyard, watering the plants with an automatic lightness, listening to the sound of water falling on the dry earth, when she noticed the presence of the car. Black, discreet, with the windows closed and a strange shine reflecting the afternoon sun. It stopped in front of the gate and did not leave. For long seconds, she watched, as if she already knew, deep down, that nothing would be the same after that. The man came down with firm steps, but his face carried an expression of respect, almost reverence. He wore a dark suit and held an envelope. She felt her stomach turn even before he said a word. Are you? He said her name as if confirming a destination. I have instructions to deliver this personally. She took the envelope with trembling hands, not understanding what was happening. The man didn't explain anything else. He just nodded, got back in the car, and drove away, leaving in the air a dense feeling that something was approaching, something she hadn't asked for, but that somehow she had already known was coming. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of paper and a small aged metal key. The handwriting was firm, but with lines worn by time. She read the first sentence and stopped. Her heart seemed to be beating too fast for the rest. Her legs weakened, her eyes filled with tears, and she sat on the porch steps as if the world had, for a second, returned to the exact place where that story had begun. There in that letter was confirmation of something she had tried to erase for all those years. That man existed, and she had not forgotten. Why now? Why after so long? And why her? The questions began to swirl inside her. The key trembled in her hand. The letter spoke of a place, an address, a house, and something else. Something that would only be revealed if she had the courage to follow through. However, it was not curiosity that moved her. It was the weight of what was not over. The feeling that that simple gesture, opening the door for a soaking wet man, had consequences that were now knocking on her door again, years later, with a force she could no longer ignore. Have you ever had this feeling? That something from the past comes back with a new name, a new format, but with the same urgency. Write in the comments, I felt that too. I want to know if this story also pulled you inward, like it did for me. And the strangest thing was that the more she tried to find logic in what she was experiencing, the more she felt that what was to come next had no easy explanation. It was as if, behind that letter and that key, there was an entire world waiting to be unearthed. And when she finally took a deep breath, held the key tightly, and decided to go to the indicated address, something inside her already knew. That door she opened 10 years ago was still ajar. Not even time was able to close it completely. The car made a thud as it pulled up to the curb. She turned off the engine with sweaty hands and stood there, breathing slowly, as if the air could prepare her heart for what was about to happen. The street was narrow. The broken sidewalks seemed to trace a path forgotten by time, and the facade of the house, simple, with peeling paint and a rusty number hanging on the side, didn't seem to hide any secrets. But she knew. Deep down, she knew that there was more than just old walls inside. There was something that had been waiting for her for a whole decade. He turned the key slowly. The latch clicked with a sound that seemed too loud in that thick silence. As he pushed open the door, the smell of old wood and dust came like a warm, uncomfortable hug. The room was small. A stained sofa, a bookshelf with faded books, and crooked pictures on the walls. But what caught her attention most was the portrait hanging above the fireplace, a young man in uniform, with the same eyes she had seen that rainy night. Eyes that were already tired before age even arrived. She ran her fingers over some objects. Everything there seemed frozen in time. The accumulated dust betrayed years of neglect, but it was organized, as if someone had left everything ready before leaving. It was then that she saw the box, in the center of the room, on a dark wooden table. Made of iron, heavy, with a crooked handle and rust on the edges. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Her hands were shaking. Each step towards it seemed to weigh more than the last. It was as if opening that box was also opening a part of herself that she had been trying to bury for years. When he finally lifted the lid, the creaking sound echoed like a whisper of things that didn't want to be forgotten. Inside, letters. Lots of them. All neatly organized, tied with aged ribbons. He picked up the first one. The paper was yellowed, but the words were strong. If I'm alive, it's because of him. Her heart raced. She read another, and another. They all told the same story in different voices. Soldiers from different places, ages, wars. Men who had been saved by that same veteran who, one night, slept on her couch. Each letter brought gratitude, remembrance, a debt of life. But why her? Why did he leave all that to her? She sat on the floor, surrounded by letters, as if she were in the center of a secret memorial. Her eyes stung. Some of the letters were stained with coffee, others with tears. Many were short, almost notes. Some were accompanied by photos, medals, names crossed out. And in all of them, a hidden truth. This man was not just a veteran. He was a silent savior, someone who carried stories of pain and life, but chose anonymity. As she leafed through the letters, she began to notice something even deeper. In each of them, there was a common thread, an absence. He never wrote back. He never left an address. He never introduced himself. He acted, he saved, and he disappeared. As if his mission was to help, not to be remembered. But she remembered. And now she seemed to be the only person alive who knew the truth hidden behind those faded papers. Grief took over. It wasn't a loud grief. It was a silent grief, like his. An overwhelming sense that, even though the world was full of tributes to heroes with shiny medals, there were those who saved lives, and yet died in oblivion. Like him. But among so many letters, there was something different. An envelope with her name on it. The handwriting was the same as the letter she had received weeks before. She didn't open it. Not yet. She just held it tightly, as if that piece of paper was the last connection to something she had never fully understood. The question that had been throbbing in her mind now burned. Why had he chosen her, of all people? Before leaving, he decided to look at the rest of the house. The room was intact. A made bed, shoes lined up, a hanger with an old military coat. There was a picture on the headboard, a group of soldiers smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders. And there he was, in the corner, serious but present. Behind the photo, a note in pen. They came back. I stayed. Yeah, the pain at that moment became something physical. It was like carrying the weight of all those grateful souls. It was like feeling, on his skin, the emptiness he had hidden for years. The loneliness of someone who saved lives, but was never saved from himself. The sound of an old clock filled the room with its regular ticking, as if counting the seconds of a wait that had already lasted too long. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Everything there screamed for remembrance. And she knew it wasn't just an inheritance, it was a mission. Write in the comments, "This story didn't let go of me." I want to know if you also felt this weight along with me. And while she still held the envelope with her name on it, her heart divided between opening it or not. She realized there was more, much more. Because that house wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She was still sitting on the floor of the house when the lawyer's phone rang. She answered with a hoarse voice, unable to hide the tears stuck in her throat. On the other end, he asked her to return to the office. He had found some more documents belonging to the veteran, forgotten files among court folders that seemed to have never been opened. That same day, she went. When he got there, he handed over a thin grey folder with few papers, but each sheet seemed to weigh like a brick. Military reports, dates, records of rescue missions, and a final report signed with a red stamp, demobilized, removed due to emotional instability. She read it silently, her stomach churning. It wasn't just a label, it was a sentence. He had been a hero. There was no doubt about that. He had pulled men to pieces from the midst of bombings. He had walked alone through minefields to save the wounded. He had slept for weeks in the mud, without food, with his body bruised and his soul carrying screams that would not stop even at night. And in the end, he had come back invisible. No party, no handshake, no second chances. Just a unstable stamp on his medical record, and silence. Later, at home, she returned to the iron box and found what appeared to be a notebook. It was covered in military cloth with worn edges. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with small, cramped letters, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space even on the paper. And what she read there was like walking through a dark forest from the inside out. He spoke of nights when he slept sitting up, afraid to close his eyes. Of people crossing the street when they saw him begging. Of being kicked, ignored, treated like a burden by the same society that once applauded his achievements. He spoke of the pain of looking in a mirror and not recognizing his own face. Of the shame of asking for help. And of the worst of all, the certainty that no one would miss him if he disappeared. But there was one page. A single page, dog-eared at the corner, that she couldn't ignore. There he wrote, "That night, someone looked at me as a human being, not as a burden, not as a mistake. And that saved me. It was as if the ground disappeared. She put her hand over her mouth to contain the tears that came from a place she didn't even know existed. That sentence cut through everything. It cut through every judgment she had ever made about that brief encounter, every doubt about whether she had done the right thing. Because in that moment, she understood. She hadn't saved him with shelter. She had saved him with her gaze, with the gesture of someone who sees, even when the whole world looks away. And it was exactly at that moment, while she was trying to breathe between sobs, that she noticed the envelope she hadn't yet opened. The letter that bore her name. His hands were shaking more than ever. The paper felt warm. Her heart was beating like a drum, as if she sensed that there was something inside that would change everything. He carefully broke the seal, and he began to read. You don't know who I was. You don't need to. But that night, when you let me in, I left behind a lifetime of darkness. Not because of the couch, or the tea, or the ceiling, but because of your silence. You didn't ask me why I was there. You didn't look at me with pity. You didn't try to fix anything. You just saw me. And that was all. I carried that memory with me until the end. And so I leave you with what I carry most precious. The gratitude of men who may never know your name, but who lived because I was there. And I was there because you reminded me that I was still someone. She pressed her forehead against the paper, weakly. Her throat was tight, her body limp. It was like holding the echo of an entire life, like touching the backstage of a story that seemed invisible. Until now. And it all made sense. The key, the house, the letters, his silence. It was as if he had spent years preparing all of this for her. As if he had handpicked the people who would guard her hidden truth. That woman, who just wanted to help someone on a rainy night, was now the guardian of a legacy. A link between the past and what was yet to come. A handwritten full stop on pages that have never been read by anyone until now. Comment. I would have opened that door too. I want to know who is feeling this with me. And even with her heart in pieces, she got up. There was still a place she needed to go. There was still one last detail of this story that wasn't in that house. She left the house with the envelope still in her hand, pressed against her chest as if it were part of her own body. The sun was already beginning to set on the horizon, and the orange sky seemed to respect what she was feeling. No sound other than the wind shaking the dry trees around the silent street. She locked the door with the same key that had opened so many wounds hours before. But what hurt now wasn't just what had been discovered. It was what was yet to come. On the way back, he drove slowly, like someone who needs time to understand his own destiny. The images from the letter repeated themselves in his mind. You gave me what the world took away. Dignity. That was it. He didn't want money. He didn't want recognition. He just wanted to be remembered as a man. And somehow, he wanted her to carry that forward, as if she were the last page of the book he'd begun writing on the battlefield. But everything took on a new dimension when, upon arriving home, he found a white envelope inside the mailbox. No sender, no stamp. Just his name, handwritten. The same type of letter, the same shaky stroke, and inside, an invitation. It was a summons sent by a group of war veterans she had never met. People who, they said, had been saved by him in different times, places, and circumstances. The text was brief but to the point. We would like you to come. We need you to come. The address given was for a community center in the countryside, far from the city. And as strange as it all seemed, there was something in her heart that left no room for refusal. She packed a small suitcase, put his folded letter in the inside pocket of her jacket, and went. The road was long, hours of silence, of thoughts passing each other like cars speeding in the wrong direction. Her mind relived everything. The rainy night, the tired look, the damp sofa, the box, the letters, the notebook. Everything seemed part of something much bigger that was only now beginning to take shape. When he arrived, The center's facade was modest, almost faded. A simple, light wood building with old windows and an American flag flying out front, slightly torn at the edges. When he pushed open the door, he didn't expect to find what he saw. There were about 20 men inside. Some young, some in their 80s. They all stopped when she entered. For a second, there was absolute silence, like the moment between lightning and thunder. One of them, with a shaved head and a limp, stood up. He held out his hand. "Are you the Rain Girl?" She nodded slowly. His eyes filled with tears before he said anything else. One by one, the men approached, and, one by one, they told stories. Of wars she had never read about in books. Of missions that had failed, and others that had only succeeded because he, the man with the wet backpack, had appeared at the last second. But what struck her most was what everyone repeated, with slight variations. "He saved me. But it was because of you that he survived long enough to save us." The impact of those words hit home. It was like discovering that an ordinary decision, an open door, an offered cup of tea, a non-judgmental look, had changed the fates of dozens of people she'd never met. The men formed a circle around her. In the center, they placed a simple tray. On it was an old, worn medal. "He asked us to give this to you," said the elder, his hands trembling. "I said that if anyone deserved to be remembered for giving their life for others, it was you." She couldn't hold it in. The tears came like heavy rain. Not from pain, but from a kind of gratitude that one only feels once in a lifetime. It was the weight of the mission, the recognition of something that, until then, she had never understood as purpose. But now it was clear. She was the turning point. The spark that rekindled in him the desire to continue, even after the war. And there, among silent heroes, she didn't just feel welcomed. She felt that, in some way, she was part of their history. As if she had also fought alongside each of them, even without a uniform, even without weapons. Right there. Now I understand why. I want to know if you also felt this change, if this surrender touched you as it touched me. Because after that, there was still something missing. And it was closer than she thought. The hall was decorated with folded flags, pictures of old battalions, and a few empty chairs deliberately lined up in the front row, each one representing a veteran who couldn't be there. When she walked in, with hesitant steps and a heavy heart, she wasn't sure what to expect. She had imagined a discreet, formal ceremony, with a few formal words and cordial greetings. But what she found there dismantled all the defenses she was still trying to keep up. As soon as he walked through the door, everyone present stood up. Men and women in uniform, with eyes marked by time, firm spines, and stories buried in their bones. Some had medals on their chests, others visible scars. And everyone, without exception, looked at her with a kind of respect that cannot always be expressed in words. For a second, she thought she was in the wrong place. But she soon understood. She was the reason everyone was there. The first to approach was a gentleman with white hair and a troubled look. He squeezed her hand tightly and said with a trembling voice, "If he survived to get me out of that hell, it was because you took him in. You saved me too." And then others came. A young man with a prosthetic leg. A woman with the tired face of someone who has seen too much. A blind man, guided by a companion, who cried even though he could not see. Each one told a fragment. A moment when that veteran appeared, when no one else would have the courage to go. And they all said the same thing. "He saved my life. But it was you who saved his." She couldn't hold back her tears. Not from sadness, but something deeper. As if suddenly all the pieces of that story, spread across years, letters and glances, were falling into place before her. That lonely man in the rain, the silence on the couch, the handwritten letter. All of that was now part of something much bigger. Of a silent chain of impact and transformation that she never imagined she had started. She was called to the stage. She walked up slowly, her legs shaking and her heart pounding too loudly in her chest. A woman in ceremonial uniform, handed her a symbolic framed diploma with the title Invisible Heroine. The applause echoed throughout the hall, but what was most striking was the silence that followed. A silence that said, "We saw you." Haino, after so much time, after so much silent pain, someone finally saw her. She held up her diploma and looked out at the crowd in front of her. These weren't just soldiers. They were survivors. And somehow, they were also living pieces of the man who had once appeared on her doorstep, covered in mud and neglect. At the end of the ceremony, as the chairs were emptying and hugs were exchanged with restrained emotion, a lady approached. Unlike the others, she was not in uniform. She had an ancient calm in her eyes, as if she had been keeping secrets for a long time. "He wrote to me, you know," she said. "When I was still young, before the war ended. I said I had hope, but I didn't know where to find humanity anymore." The woman took a yellowed letter from her pocket, carefully folded. "I kept it. I never answered. But when I heard from you, I understood that he found it. That night, in your room, he found it." And before leaving, he added, "Some people save with weapons, others with words. You saved with silence. And that, my daughter, is rare." Those words echoed in her head for days. Even after she returned home, even after she hung her diploma on the living room wall and closed the box with the letters. Because there was something else she still felt, an unfinished mission. She would wake up in the early hours of the morning with the sound of applause still ringing in her ears, but also with the image of the veteran leaving without looking back. That wouldn't leave her mind. It wasn't just longing, it was a calling. Comment: I would also open that door. I want to know if, somewhere inside, this story also touched you. And the next morning, as the sun peeked out from behind the trees, she realized there was still one place she needed to visit. Because his story didn't end at the house, or at the ceremony. It ended where it all began, and she was ready to go back there. The morning he decided to return to that house, the sky was exactly as it had been that night. Gray, heavy, with the wind whistling through the cracks in the world. She got out of the car slowly, feeling her legs hesitate in front of the familiar gate. But what moved her now was not the weight of the past, but the responsibility of keeping it alive. Because that house, which once held pain and silence, was about to become a beacon for all who have ever felt forgotten. He spent the whole day cleaning, organizing, taking a deep breath between one memory and another. Each letter was placed in simple frames, with dates and names, as if each word were a tattoo on the wall of memory. Photos, notebook notes, medals. Everything found its place. Not to display glories, but to tell the truth. The hidden truth that many of the heroes who return from war do not find applause. They find oblivion. She decided not to paint the walls. He kept the worn tones, the marks on the baseboards, the wood floors that creaked when someone walked by. I wanted the place to speak for itself. Whoever entered there would feel the time, the abandonment, the silent struggle that man fought until his last day. And when he finished, he wrote with his own hands the phrase that he pasted on one of the central walls. Sometimes all someone needs is a dry place, a human eye, and a chance to be remembered. In the following days, the first visitors began to arrive. A boy accompanied by his grandmother, a Gulf War veteran, a young man who was making a documentary about untold stories of America. Two brothers who recognized one of the letters on the wall. The author was their father, who had been missing for years. And many others, each touched by something different, but united by the same feeling, gratitude. She didn't expect the place to gain traction so quickly. But perhaps the world needed this, a reminder. A space where silence also had a voice. She began to receive letters, notes, and even anonymous flowers left at the gate. Some messages came from soldiers who had never spoken about what they had experienced. Others came from ordinary people who, upon learning the story, decided to open their doors to someone else. One afternoon, a group of students entered the memorial in silence. Among them, a boy stood in front of one of the photos for several minutes, his eyes fixed on the veteran's face. When she approached, he said, He looks like my grandfather." "Did your grandfather serve too?" she asked. "No. But he also sleeps on my mother's couch. No one talks to him. Only me." She felt a lump in her throat. History was repeating itself, not in time, but in form. And now, perhaps, with a different ending. Little by little, she began to understand that she was not only carrying the story of that man, she was carrying all the stories that had been silenced before finding space to blossom. And, as unlikely as it seemed, she, an ordinary woman, without uniform or glory, had become the bridge between the pain and dignity of so many who just wanted to be remembered. And every time someone asked why he left all that for her, she would smile calmly and say, "Because that night I opened a door. And with that, I also opened a new destiny." Comment there. Every story deserves to be remembered. I want to see who carries this truth in their chest like she did. Because memory is also an act of courage, and this story is not over yet. If you've come this far, it's because this story spoke to some part of you. Maybe a memory, maybe a feeling that you didn't even know was stored inside. And if at some point you felt like you would also open that door, then this channel is the place for you. Here, we rescue what the world has been forgetting: empathy, memory, humanity. Subscribe to continue following these stories that truly touch people. Because each video here is made for people who still believe in the impact of a simple gesture. And if this journey touched you, leave a comment below. I would have done the same. Only those who felt it until the end will understand. Oh, and leave a like too. Not just for me, but for everything this story represents. It helps this kind of message reach those who also need to hear it. There is a video here that continues in the same spirit. Click and follow me. There are still many stories that deserve to be told.